Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi Magnish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. TNT affirms ties with the U.S. and Venezuela amid tensions. WASA completes pipeline repairs in San Fernando. Car pilot rescued in police shootout in Maraval. And internationally, New Zealand fugitive father shot dead after 4 years on the run. Now for the details. Foreign Affairs Minister Sean Sobers says Trinidad and Tobago continues to maintain strong relations with both the United States and Venezuela despite regional tensions over drug trafficking and recent military action. Sobers described Venezuela's diplomatic ties with TNT as cordial and dismissed controversial remarks from a Venezuelan minister as unfortunate. He also said TNT welcomes international support against transnational crime, even if it involves physical intervention. Meanwhile, police are investigating the discovery of a decomposed body in Toco, believed to be linked to a U.S. military strike on a Venezuelan drug vessel. The Water and Sewage Authority has completed 70 meters of sewer line replacement on Sutton Street, San Fernando. The repairs, which began on September 5th, were finished before the reopening of schools. WASA says around 200 residents will benefit from the upgrade, which addresses health risks from an overflowing manhole. Permanent road reinstatement is expected within 3 weeks. Caribbean Airlines pilot Daniel Carwall was freed in a police rescue mission in Maraval after being kidnapped last week. Police exchanged gunfire with his captors during the operation, killing 1 suspect and arresting 3 others. Commissioner of Police Alistair Guevara confirmed more suspects are being sought. Carwall, who also owns a private aviation company, was unharmed. Police have now freed 4 kidnapped victims in 7 weeks. Meanwhile, the search continues for missing Cunupia businessman Imraz Clubs Ali, last seen on September 4th. Internationally, in New Zealand, a man who lived in the wilderness with his 3 children for nearly 4 years has been killed in a police shootout. Tom Phillips, who disappeared in 2021 after losing custody of his children, was confronted by police after a robbery report. 1 officer was seriously injured during the exchange. Authorities later found all 3 children safe at a remote campsite. The children's mother said she is relieved they are safe but saddened by how the case ended. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi Magnish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
WESN.
Apologies for yesterday, but we're back. Talking point on WSN, Deacon and Capital Sean Michael Small. Yesterday was the opening of schools. Yesterday was International Literacy Day. Yesterday was also a day where Apparently, I did not experience it myself, but former Minister of Public Utilities Marvin Gonzalez, he went off on the situation that, well, there was a wasser repair. I believe I passed it the night before, and it caused traffic the night before. And I didn't necessarily expect that. I don't know if it's the same situation or not, but it was a hell of a way to start off the beginning of the school term when traffic is at its highest. Yeah, disruption to the flow of traffic between 6:30 and 10 p.m. Hopefully that is over. This is one of those things where, you know, it might not be totally fair to ask the question or to have high expectations, because we don't know when the emergency happened. Maybe there was no indication of a fault. But to some extent, it's hard. It's really hard not to say or ask, isn't there a better way to do this? And this is one of those things where I do wonder if we're complacent in that, well, this is what we've always done to fix it, as opposed to, is the result satisfactory or not? Even if the situation was sudden, unexpected, taken by surprise, happened now for now, to what extent could more things have been done? Could different traffic management plans been put in place? We have two sides of the highway. Couldn't some of the traffic been alleviated with proper... For the football match, they had police directing traffic even when they had a traffic light. On intersections with a traffic light, they had police directing traffic. We know that the traffic on a morning is mostly coming into Port of Spain. We had another side of the highway, not so? I could be wrong, but based on at least one newspaper's reports, traffic backed up one side and the eastbound lane seems relatively clear. Even if it's not sufficient to deal with the full capacity required. And that's just off the top of my head. Now, maybe there's reasons why it couldn't work, but part of leadership would be to face the public with issues and then explain why we manage them in the way that we manage them and why we couldn't manage them the way that you might want us to manage them. What the challenges are. And if you can't do that, if you're not prepared to do that, then, because this is not a case where I am the Lord, you are the servant, and you will just obey. This is not an upper class nobility to the lower class peasantry. This is elected official to the citizenry. And if governments of Trinidad and Tobago want to continue the complacency of keeping everything in the northwest corner of the country, then they have to be prepared to show proper judgment, communication skills, leadership skills when it comes to dealing with issues that's going to impact people having to go to their place of employment, having to go to the place where government offices are in order to access government services, etc., etc. That is a duty of care, responsibility. You set it up that way, rhetorically speaking. This is now the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Because it's 63 years. If we wanted to move it, we could have moved it already. If we wanted to decentralize, we could have decentralized already. If we wanted to ensure that we don't have traffic congestion for silly issues, we could have done things already with regards to road and traffic management and our road networks. And listen, you might not necessarily like Marvin Gonzalez's aggressive stance. Sometimes I wonder if he's too aggressive on it, because then it is politically charged emotionally, right? And I rather take the emotion to that extent out of it. Debate issues on the merits of the situation, not necessarily. Don't allow passion to potentially go too far and derail, because what happens is when people see passion, they will make assumptions of you, and they might not, those who are against you will try to shut you off. will try to ignore you. But in this case, he points to how WASA managed the situation. He points to the fact that, hey, you have this person here who I warned you before it happened. The former CEO was reporting to this junior that has no executive experience. I have yet to hear the Minister of Public Utilities give a rebuttal to what Marvin Gonzalez has said with regards to the current CEO of WASA. And Marvin Gonzalez has not said anything to say, oh, the man committed a crime, the man did this, the man did that. No, he's just pointing to the fact that this was a junior, not just a junior to the CEO, but a junior that was so under the totem pole, he was probably separated by 1 or 2 layers of reporting to the CEO. And I'm just being conservative with my guesstimate there. And now all of a sudden, first of all, there was hearsay, rumors that the CEO was forced to report to him, and then he replaces the CEO. Now, he might be qualified. The promotion might be justified. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. But part of leadership is, again, when your political opponent is making accusations against you, if you don't defend yourself reasonably with sound arguments and facts, then it looks as though you can't defend yourself. And when you look like you can't defend yourself, it looks as though there's something there that you're trying to hide, or that you don't want to admit, or that you don't want the public to see. Notice, I did not say that there is something there that's wrong. I said, if you don't defend a position, and let me add now sufficiently, you look as though you can't defend the position. You appear, there's the perception. It is reasonable to think that you can't defend yourself reasonably. And then when you can't defend yourself reasonably because you are not defending yourself, how does that look? It looks like there's something wrong. Nothing has to be wrong for you to make yourself look like you're doing something wrong when you don't understand how to do your job. And what I really don't understand, I don't understand how the opposition is playing as though they didn't lose the election. That is the angle almost by which their communication seems to be flavored with. It has the same perspectives as if they were still in government. It's very weird to listen to sometimes. But the actual government now, I don't understand. You've complained about the PNM for 9 to 10 years, and you can't even go half a year before starting to make some of the same basic mistakes that the PNM made. I'm talking about communication, leadership, accountability. I don't know if it's laziness. I don't know if it is a lack of proficiency. I don't know if it's poor judgment. I don't know if it's because of an agenda. I do know that, and people might say, oh, I'm being premature. Listen, I called out the previous commissioner of police situation before anybody else is willing to, as far as I'm aware. Because you see certain signs that indicate thought processes and modus operandi. And it's not my job to disprove them. It's my job to only present what those signs could represent. And if those are the signs that we're getting, more often than not, now the current government has made a big mistake. The current government has not had that smoking gun era that you have to like, oh my gosh, how could these people actually do that? These are all small mistakes. That's why I'm saying I'm not ready to condemn the situation as WASA as being, oh no, look how wrong this is. But what I am saying is when you want to go as though you are the Lord of the manor and you could do whatever you want, that's what some ministers are making themselves to look like in varying degrees. That is the beginning of the trap that you set for yourself. That is the trap that the PNM set for themselves so successfully. They walk right into that trap. They set that trap for them. They dug that pit themselves. They put the spikes in that pit themselves. they then trick themselves to fall in that pit and impale themselves. Because it's not as though the UNC got 400,000 votes. The amount of votes that the UNC got was not the real story. It's part of the story, but it is the smaller part of the amount of votes the PNM lost. That situation is not guaranteed to be repeated in 4.5 years. Anyway, this was unplanned. But it's just one of those things where, when will we be able to get better job performance? I can't remember if something similar like this happened under the PNM's administration with WASA. I don't know. But that's not the point. It's not the point. It's not a tit for tat. Well, they were bad, so we can be bad. That's not a defense. That's why one of the things I said is it laziness? Because laziness and complacency says, well, the PNM was this bad, so we just need to be less bad than that. You know? Less bad by a little bit. And I actually think that's probably another trap that the previous administration set for themselves, where they thought, well, we just need to be not as bad as the partnership. We'll be less bad than the partnership. We didn't fire that many ministers. We'll be less bad, and we'll be fine. No. At some point, the country will be sick of you. But we're just trading off sickening situations. That means in the end, we'll be perpetually still sick. Back to world literacy, international literacy. The Prime Minister was right to point out, and this was a good thing that she did, as much as I just criticized everybody just now. A wonderful coincidence, she calls it. That's a nice thing to say. It's not like she's not trying to say, oh, we planned this out and no, right? It happened for a lot of days. It's a coincidence. But look what it signifies. Here's the thing, and I'll try and be short with this because there's a lot of other things to get to. I have been saying, since maybe close to the start of Talking Point, or by the second year, media literacy is going to be the real threshold moving forward that you have to meet. The trick with that is that doesn't mean that you could be illiterate and somehow be media literate. You need, as pointed out, I believe to some extent by the Prime Minister, literacy is still like a basic thing that you need. But now we've reached the point where it's no longer, well, you just need that. You just need that and you could function reasonably well. That's how it was way in the past. And somewhere around the time when I was going to school, literacy, the impact of just being literate, the benefits of just being literate in modern society were reducing. And dare I say now. And to some extent, being media literate and being able to actually understand what the source is, where they're coming from, what their perspective is, what their biases might be, what is the strength of the evidence that they present. Are they trying to mama guy you with how they frame things or how they present things? What are they leaving out potentially? That's why you need to see more than one source on any news item, right? Things like that. Could you trust these people? What is their track record? Not just on issues like this, but all issues, so that you could get a clue on their mindset. Technically speaking, you need to do that since the newspaper. You need to do that since the town crier, the bard in the tavern, giving you the stories, giving you the gossip, giving you the oral history, giving you the account of what happened at the Battle of Thermopylae or whatever. But now that we don't just have a town crier and a bard and a tavern, then we got newspapers, then we got radio, then we got television, now we have the internet. And the irony is, the internet is a combination of the oldest way to get news and the newest ways to get news. You have the mass reach. You basically have a town crier, a bard and a tavern, but able to speak to anyone who is willing to listen. And it's the willingness part that is that new extra dimension, because you don't have to tune in at 7 to get your news. You could get it whenever it's published, on demand. And knowing and understanding media, one of the things with this whole US-Venezuela thing is the fact that there are a lot of claims out there, but the claims for the most part are speaking absolutist positions as though they know for sure, when the fact of the matter is to say that you know for sure is foolish. Yes, you might know, okay, this plane can fly this high, this ship carries this number of troops and this number of missiles. That you could know for sure, at least so far of whatever is published. Military secrets still at times will obscure capabilities, right? You could look at history to see certain trends and patterns. But we have people who are speaking as though they are within the halls of the Venezuelan cabinet and the halls of the White House and the halls of all of the cabinets and the governments of TNT, as though they know. They read the tea leaves and look in the crystal ball. And that is how some people do news. They talk. This is the thing. It is fine in your private capacity, in a social gathering or a rum shop, to say, I know, so. But if you can't prove it in a court of law, well then, in the wider world, if you can't prove it or give a reasonable argument of why you say it's true, history is not necessarily, because something happened in history, it's bound to happen again. Yes, it can happen again. It's not guaranteed to happen again. And then there's a whole host of other sensationalistic news about this situation, and everyone's eating it up and getting afraid and, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? When the fact of the matter is, you've fallen for their trap. Sensationalistic headlines are meant to get clicks. Clicks are meant to get advertising dollars. They don't care, some of these media people on the internet, don't care about truth, don't care about objectivity. They care about their reach, they care about their engagement, they care about their business numbers. And at times, in a way, they're activists who at least are genuine for a cause and are not just capitalist greed. But they will then only care about their biases. They will not give you an objective opinion. And when we in TNT, we have to get over the syndrome of, well, it's on the internet, so it must be true. And that's what literacy, when you go a few steps higher, is about. It is going to be a challenge. Perhaps the new generations who have grown up with these things, it will come more naturally to them. To some extent, I cannot put myself in the shoes of the older generations or the younger generations, because the people around my age, we kind of grew up in between. It's a very strange place. When you look at history and you think, one of the things I always thought about various historical eras is, what about the transitional periods in between? Well, I grew up essentially in the transitional period in between, from whatever was before the digital age, I guess you could say the analog age, to the digital age, to the age of information technology being at your fingertips. And it's a hell of a thing to observe. It's a little piece of history that I have been able to witness firsthand. And one of the things, of course, is that transitional period, like from horses to cars, or from ship travel only to air travel. You know, we have to figure it out. But the thing is, because this will impact things like politics and elections, and how laws are drafted and proposed, which laws are proposed, which laws go through, this is not just consumer spending patterns now. This is how we determine our future through our systems of government. People say democracy is bad. All right, find a better system. I'll give you a hint. Communism is not it. As I'm on literacy, I'll just close this segment. I want to talk about the situation with the cops in schools. It is not, I'll go on the record again and say, this ain't a perfect solution, this is not a silver bullet. This is one tool, this is one arrow in the quiver, right? But not all problems need a hammer. Sometimes you need a screwdriver, because you can hammer every nail down, but with the right tool, it's relatively simple to pull a nail out. You can't hammer certain things in for it to stick. Not every problem is two pieces of wood that you need to join. Now with a screw, it might take some time, but because of the grooves, you're potentially forging a stronger connection. The minister says cops will stay out of the way in schools. That, I don't think, is the problem. The problem is, at the end of the day, the cops will be present. And if present, they'll be forced to act. They will have, for certain things, less discretion. Because the school has the discretion of, do we call the police or do we not call the police? And the law is not a hard and fast thing, because as was pointed out by Ashraf, the public is not ready for all laws to be enforced fully. We're not. We're too laissez-faire. We're too, why it had to be so serious, partner? But with the police in school now, if they use too much discretion, then they will be taken for granted. And if they outright don't act in situations where it's clear they should act, maybe because they themselves might not necessarily know fully what their boundaries are, because police in schools is not a natural thing. There's no police school unit for the last 63 years. So if they fail to act, or if they go too far, if they overreach in their actions, what will happen is they also could harm the reputation of the police. They also could cause damage to the system. They also could cause a loss in trust and confidence and faith in both the police but also the education system. This is what the government doesn't seem to understand. There are risks involved, and then also depending if they go too far with their actions, or if they don't act or don't act enough. Both sides of that equation could lead to unnecessary harm to individuals. It might not be physical harm, it could be emotional harm, it could be mental harm. A criminal psychologist, this is in one of the reports from in the last couple of days, said children living in communities with strained police relations, a positive interaction with an officer in a safe system of school can potentially reshape their entire view of authority and safety. But I think that's only if the police officer knows that you're going to, similar to when dealing with the general public, there will be some students that might not trust you, that might not view you in a positive light, whose parents might be bad talking to police because the parents might have had bad interactions with police. The kids might have witnessed the bad interactions with police. I understand what this psychologist is saying, but I want to add the flip side to that. If there are bad interactions in school, then that child will be pushed further away from authority, from the system. And if they start out with a chip on their shoulder against the police might pick up on this, and some of our police officers are not the most professionally well, and these are new, young officers. Can we guarantee, in a situation like this, ideally, you would get a set of officers in their 50s and older, hopefully who have grandchildren, and hopefully are not bad parents and grandparents. Because now these police won't just be there to enforce the rules. They will indirectly be part, or rather, they will be more directly part, even though it's still indirect. Because they're technically not teachers, so they technically don't have a formal caste. But they will be in the environment of these children. They will be authority figures in the environment of these children. They will be part of their development. And they need not just the, well, if they fight, do this, if they don't fight, do that. They need to know how to relate to these kids sufficiently when necessary, so that the interaction does not harm their development. Maybe I'm wrong, but this seems like an obvious thing to me. Because when you have a family and the parents divorce and they're looking to date, to marry again, whatever. What is one of the things that single parents have in that situation? They consider, how will this new adult in the lives of my children, what will it mean for my children? Because even if they're not the parent, we're separated, but you still have two parents, that's fine, but you're still part of their lives now. You're still part of the development. You can't distance yourself, insulate yourself from the potential impact that a new adult into the equation will have. We know this at a basic level like that. You think this is that much different just because it's police and not adult relationships? It's a new adult in the environment of children. Unless they're going to hide away somewhere and never be seen, I don't know what's the point of that then. The Minister of Homeland Security says that parents need to do more to instill discipline into their children. Yes, to some extent that is true. But to say that that's going to solve everything, no, it's not. This is just another aspect of the situation. There will be some problems that need police. There will be some problems that could have not been problems if the parents did their jobs. Those two things are not going to cover everything. And then also, the people in authority need to ask. You can make a statement like this initially, but in the long run, you're looking at a situation where, okay, maybe there are a lot of parents that are not parenting their kids. Why? Maybe it's a single parent, a single mother, a single father. Maybe they have to work 2 to 3 jobs to keep the roof over their heads. Yes, they could spend more time with the kids, but that literally might mean then the kids don't have food. You can't just tell the parent in that scenario, make better choices. Even if it is their fault that they've reached in the situation where they've reached, telling them that they should regret their past mistakes is not going to help them now. And that's just one example of why is it that parents might not be parenting their kids? Why is it that parenting might not be sufficient in 2025? What about if the family is in a hotspot and the parent is doing everything they can just to try to keep them away from the gangs and they really don't have much emotional capacity, resources, assistance to do much more, to combat the influence of guys on the block, wayward family members, some girl that put ideas in his head, some boy that put ideas in her head that really don't understand life and is just using them. There's a lot. You could insulate your child, and that includes disconnecting them. But if you disconnect your child from the digital age in order to protect them, don't you run the risk of them being left behind? Children can't be prepared for adulthood if you shelter them all the time. You have to expose them to some amount of risk, give them the opportunity to learn from some level of mistakes. But some people, the outside influences are too much to bear. And no matter what the parent says or do, it's not enough. Because the environment that has been fostered in our communities and in our country is not good enough for everybody. For some families in some areas it's fine, for others it's not. Is it their responsibility for all of the negative influences outside of their household? Do they have to fix that too? Well, I thought that was a government's job. I'm not saying the minister is wrong. I'm saying the minister is starting at a point, and it's correct, and there are parents that don't parent their kids. But then at some point, you need a working group. Remember, you had a working group. I can't remember what it was for. You need a working group to then ask the question, what exactly is going on in our communities that this is a phenomenon that we could observe happening? Why is it happening? What are the reasons it's happening? And are there certain factors that we could affect to change the situation? I understand budget issues are what they are, but still, the Prime Minister has, and I'm reading this for the first time, and she's also not wrong. She's also not wrong. Our teachers have become victims of assault and abuse by some students and parents. That will not continue. Any student or parent who abuses or assaults a member of teaching staff will be removed from school by the TTPS. Too many students are bullied, robbed, and beaten at school. So some children, it is a terror to attend school. We have children failing because they are too afraid to attend school. I don't doubt this is true. No matter what some commentators say, the law remains the law, and TTPS officers are free to carry their firearms inside or outside of schools if it is deemed necessary. Police officers report to their seniors, not the school principals. Therefore, acts of violence will be reported according to TTPS protocol and dealt with according to the law. To some extent, when you go to that end of that issue, it seems like this is how it should be. There's no more discretion in this. There's no more 17 suspension. The police will deal with it now. And here's the thing. I'll give the Prime Minister props, at least with how this was phrased. TTPS officers are free to carry their firearms inside or outside of schools if it is deemed necessary. Because when you have reports of somebody fired, there was a shootout next to a school, that is not the situation where I want my police to not be armed. Because heaven forbid, we have unarmed police in a school near a hotspot, two gangs decide to shoot at each other, or maybe they're going after a target who tries to escape through the school because he's thinking, oh, they're not going to be brave enough to come in the school and chase me here because there's police here. Well, that's when, you know what, you better wish that the police there are armed. And the key point is, if it is deemed necessary. To some extent, some of the issues the police has is deficiencies in training, because ideally, the officers will be the ones best in position. If not the officers themselves actually in the schools, their immediate supervisors will be the ones in the best position to determine if they need to carry their guns or not, because they are the ones that actually encounter the environment and get a lay of what are the situations there. Some could say, hey, the Prime Minister is too gung-ho in our language, and maybe to some extent, I don't mind if it is to express urgency because we're in a situation where people are getting hurt. And if we have kids that are too afraid to go to school because they're being bullied or worse, you don't get back years of your education just so. When you're behind the curve, it's not always bad to be behind the educational system curve, but not everybody is then prepared to do what it takes to compensate or overcome for that. Not everybody knows how. And there will be some who are not capable if they lose out on their formative years. So it's a catch-22. It's a catch-22. And this, what the Prime Minister's frustrations, I will share with her in this case. It speaks to the frustrations of armchair generals, of armchair politicians, of armchair decision makers who look at the world through a very idealistic lens, who look at everything as a matter of black or white, binary, 0 or 1, and doesn't understand that just due to the sheer complexity of human nature, difficult, complex situations like this are made even more complex by the fact that human nature cannot be defined in a limited box, but must account for unlimited possibilities. You could reduce the randomness with strong culture, with strong values, with strong ideals, with proper accountability, with proper safeguards in place to deal with those who disrupt social order. And by social order, I don't mean any sort of political oppression, but rather the social contracts that we have with each other to not harm each other, and if necessary, to go out our way to help each other, to safeguard each other's lives, because we are all in this together. And things that disrupt that harmony, that unity, to ensure that we do not allow each other to suffer. Yeah, I have no issue with people getting frustrated by, oh, no, it must be this or that. It must be X or Y. And taking a relatively oversimplified view, principled view over something that should not necessarily be a principle, because it will not stand up to all situations it encounters. Murder is wrong. That is the principle. Killing is bad. That's not a principle. Because at times, if someone is using lethal force, it might require lethal force to protect whoever the target of that first person is. Not having guns around children is technically not a principle. Because if a criminal comes around kids with a gun, what you're going to do to defend them? Carry a stick? If someone threatens a child's life with a gun, most cases you probably will need a gun. So it's not a principle to live by not to have guns around kids. It's generally the ideal. But there will be exceptions but we have to have guns around them right now. And leave it up to the police to figure it out. Now, if you want to say the police don't have the capabilities to figure it out, then the issue is not having guns or not having guns. The issue is they need better training. Too often we try to compensate with an issue by treating it perpendicularly, tangentially, indirectly. It doesn't work because you're not actually dealing with the issue. Let's take a break. I've been going on for too long on this. There's a lot to unpack. We didn't have yesterday. There's a lot to unpack. The media ambassador, of course, since we didn't have a show yesterday, he wasn't with us yesterday. Hopefully this Thursday, because we haven't had him for a week and a half now, it would be. Hopefully this Thursday we will have him so we can get an update from the TTPS, because that's one of the few things that are working to disseminate necessary information to the public, to provide necessary information to the public, to warn the public on certain things. So hopefully that will continue. But in the meantime, we'll be right back after this. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WSN, the content capital.
Advanced Solutions Technical Institute isn't just about courses, it's about creating futures. We serve every learner, from the new graduate to the seasoned professional, with engaging, supportive staff and tailored learning plans. Study in the way that works for you and gain skills in business, security, finance, telecoms, fiber optics, and beyond. ASTI, training tomorrow's leaders today.
KDM Health Limited says, test yourself for STDs in the privacy of your own home. Our self-help test kits for all STDs are available at our wholesale office in Chaguanas. Call 283-1423, visit our website at www.kdmhealtht.com or email us at kdmhealthlimited@gmail.com to place your orders. Available at all health institutions and pharmacies. Contact us for a free list of products and prices.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Well, the big thing that is generally on most people's minds, I think right now, that's taking up a lot of emotional space and mental space, is still the US-Venezuela situation, because it was unprecedented. Now, one of the things in the media, and this is maybe both a good and a bad thing. This is why it's not so easy to say, oh, this is what the media should do, just do this or just do that. It is subjective. You need to exercise good judgment. One of the things the media is doing is, of course, pointing to the fact that, hey, look at America's history in the region. They always do that every time something comes up with American relations in the region, right? Because America tends to be the big dog with the big stick, and they wield the big stick, and everybody doesn't like that they wield the big stick, so they complain about, look how many times they've wielded the big stick. Meanwhile, there will be situations where some of us at times are like, please wield the big stick to deal with the thing that's going to bite us. Like Guyana with Venezuela, currently over Essequibo. Now, what's interesting is the situation is US-Venezuela, but we don't necessarily have the same kind of running commentary on Venezuela. Except there will be those who are biased for Venezuela, and they will be quick to point out, oh my gosh, the poor Venezuelan people, what did they do? Not necessarily trying to, because those who know a thing or two on the ground of what's happening in Venezuela have a different perspective of just the media people who want to say, well, Venezuela is against the US and the US is the big bad evil, so Venezuela must be the people of truth, justice, and the moral way. When the reality is, usually in international situations, remember, politics has a morality of its own. You think international politics don't have a morality of its own? Just because America might be doing something you disagree with doesn't mean that the other side is automatically agreeable. And that's the thing. By the media bringing up all of these situations that America has done, it implies negativity, because these things are, oh my gosh, look at what they did, right? They don't have to say it outright. They just imply, look how many times they got it wrong. Look how many times they interfered. Again, don't mind the fact that in some cases, maybe people wanted or needed them to interfere. Now, there's one article in the Newsday that I found a couple days old now. And the headline is just that U.S. has a long history of interference in the region. And they point out to the Bay of Pigs incident, which, to be honest, yeah, that was a little too much secret agent nonsense going there. It is what it is. And then they also pointed to the US's 1983 invasion of Grenada, where they removed Maurice Bishop, which one caller pointed out he knew people who were being victimized by Mr. Bishop's government. Do you think the people of Grenada are like, oh my gosh, how dare those Americans come into our country and deal with someone who is threatening to kill people? So can we have our cake and eat it too? Not saying that you don't point out the errors of America's ways, but then this is where, are you being responsible and objective, or are you trying to present a narrative, which I have been accused of trying to present a narrative, and maybe I am, right? Again, it's subjective. But what's the narrative of Venezuela? Well, it's the narrative of Venezuela and the causes of the situation that it's in is very, 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 very different right now. So, US warships, a whole MEU has come in and they've had a strike. Now, there's two things about this. First of all, I made statements based on assumptions that I believe and still believe, if they were true, to be reasonable. If it was in international waters, they might have struck it before it reached someone's sovereign waters. I have heard some people say, or I've read some things, that it was in Venezuelan waters. And it was close to us, maybe as close as 45 miles, relatively speaking. We may have, our radar might have been able to even pick up the Perogue, depending on if our radar could give you that level of detail 50 miles out. Also, and this is what I don't necessarily agree with now, I thought they struck the craft because they couldn't catch up to it. Now, if you look at the outboards, they're not the biggest outboards you could get. So potentially, they could have intercepted the boat. If it was 300 to 400 horsepower outboards, it might have been a different story. But potentially, they could have intercepted this. Because it was reported, at least there's a report that, and I don't know how true this is, because they say a veteran of U.S. Armed Forces has stated that the people in that pirogue, in that boat, got 3 warnings in Spanish, English, and Portuguese to stop, and they did not stop. Now, if he's a veteran, I'm wondering, how do you know that? Were you there? Because a veteran implies you're not active serving, and for the most part, I don't think anybody on those ships is looking to speak to the press. Maybe I'm wrong, outside of the commander or whatever, but whatever he says has to be very, very, sanitized by the higher-ups and so on. But let's just assume it to be true. They were given a verbal warning. The warnings were ignored. The helicopter, apparently, they even tried to hit the helicopter that was in the vicinity, telling them to stop. I don't know what that means, if it's hit with a weapon or if the helicopter was low flying and they tried to ram it with the boat, depending on the conditions of the seas. Right? I don't know what that means. They say that the helicopter flew over them, put the light in front of them. The crew was also carrying weapons. If they weren't wearing anything, and I assume they mean weapons in this case, if they weren't brandishing or had weapons on them, it was enough to stop and get checked, as happens every day in the Caribbean, but they chose to defy and paid the consequences. Now, I'm not entirely sure how legal it is, because in my mind, if you wanted to stop that boat, unless there's a very technical reason why you can take the shot from the helicopter at the engines, because it's one of those things where, what, are you afraid of hitting one of the people in the boat? So that's why you couldn't shoot the boat, but you could hit it with a missile, what I assume to be a Hellfire or something similar in size. Because capturing them would have been infinitely better than not capturing them. Here's the thing though. In Somalia, and you could argue that piracy, right, along that western part of the Indian Ocean off of Africa, it's borderline not just highly disruptive to the world economy, but also it's highly threatening to the lives of the crews of these freighters and tankers. And the naval efforts, because Navy ships are used to combat piracy. I have seen some videos of some of these expeditions, right? Parts of the crews are trained on how to board boats, take prisoners, and the like. And they essentially act like, for the most part, law enforcement. Most of them are not MPs. They're just sailors with extra training for this rotation. That is to say, their ship is deployed to deal with this for however many months. So the precedent is, on high seas crime, you can and have American ships participating in this, arrest people and go out of your way not to just kill them. Because, to be honest, if you could just hit a boat with a missile that you suspect of something, because it's not proven in a court of law, so yes, they have intelligence, right? But I use the word suspect not to say that, it was misleading what they said, but rather just that it's not proven in a court of law that was a drug smuggling boat. Well, if that is the precedent set, you could do that with piracy. Just nuke the pirates. Why do we have to chase after them and catch up to them and blah, 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 blah. To hell with that. But that's not what the precedent set to deal with piracy of Somalia was. One of the things with a situation like this is it can set a new precedent for dealing with serious crime in international waters and the high seas. And it's one of the reasons why Human Rights Watch, Human Rights Watch, they said the U.S. cannot simply use lethal force on anyone it wishes. Criminal suspects should be prosecuted in a court of law, not executed at sea. The thing is, I'm not saying the U.S. was wrong or right with what they did, but it needs to essentially be tested now. It needs to, I think, needs to go before the courts. What court it will go to is a whole other question. But to some extent, it needs to face a legal challenge. It needs to be debated in an appropriate venue, not just court of public opinion, not just political filibustering, in order to say this is what we approve of as the precedent that will be set moving forward, because there will be other situations, there are other areas of piracy, not just off of the Eastern African coast, right? In the Middle East area, in the Gulf area. On top of other things. The precedent set here could impact a lot. And I have no issue with a human rights group pushing back on the situation because that's their job. Again, it might end up for various reasons that the destruction of that boat was justified. But until we get those reasons, they're right for doing what they're doing. Questioning. Saying, hey, we can't just allow this to happen willy-nilly now. You need to have a real good reason, a real good excuse to let this pass. Otherwise, we can't let it pass because it will set a precedent that will apply to other situations around the world. And the thing is, it will set a precedent that other nations will take a cue from. So this is a genie. Once it's let out of the box, it is even harder than any sort of domestic situation to put back in the box. Now, a couple other things on this situation that I wanted to point out. In the article with regards to the US's history, the Newsday, I believe this is an exclusive, so you can read the full article. I'll try just to take the key, well, not even all the key main points, but the main points I want to take from the article. I would suggest reading the whole article because I have a lot more faith in the commentary in this article than a lot of the other commentary provided by other so-called regional experts that for the most part are really just armchair academics that have no skin in the game and are speaking from a platform of idealism and not reality. So one of the people that the article was speaking to was Dr. Evan Ellis from the U.S. Army War College, Research Professor of Latin American Studies. Right? During Trump's, this is one of the things that he said. He said Trump tried to work with the then Venezuelan government in Trump's first term, despite not recognizing it as legitimate. Those efforts to work and negotiate with Maduro did not work out well. Maduro would release hostages, take more hostages. Then there was an attempt to work with him on accepting Venezuelan migrants back. Maduro tried to turn that into a propaganda tool for the U.S. My sense is that President Trump has gone to the point where he said the flow of drugs and these other activities have to stop. He said the force sent to the Caribbean was not large enough to take over a country, but could be used to launch an operation to take individuals out of a country. The attack submarine was protecting the ships. The destroyers and the cruisers are there to protect the ships, but also they can strike targets on land. And it's very interesting, he admits part of why such a large force was deployed was to defend itself from Venezuelan aggression. And this is one of those things where I don't understand. This is why they need so much police. You go with overwhelming force, ironically, in a law enforcement type setting where you have limited objectives. Because unlimited objectives, in how I'm using the term here, well then we just level the building. Why we had to go in and arrest somebody, right? There's a threat in the building, we just level the building. That's what a military would do. Limited objectives is we're not there to deal with everybody in the building. We're there just to deal with this one guy who have a warrant for. And we'll go with overwhelming force to ensure that everybody else in proximity doesn't try to jump in because they see that we're ready for a confrontation, but we're not doing it to provoke a confrontation. Because if you send 2 police officers into a hotspot to try to arrest a gang leader by themselves, that'll make sense, right? And he points to the intelligence that, hey, these gangs might be operating in certain ways, connected to the government terrorist organization, which means that you need more than just 2 beat cops on the street to go after these cartel people. Now, a local professor, who is one of his titles is co-founder of the Caribbean Policy Consortium, Professor Anthony Bryan, he said the U.S. is not interested in regime change. Quote, that would be very difficult to accomplish. Venezuela is not a small country, and to wage war to have regime change would be disastrous for the U.S. Bottom line is to control the cartels, and this is to stop supply of drugs to the U.S. The possibility of extracting Maduro and other criminal elements exists, but it would have very severe repercussions, particularly with Venezuelan people. This is a last resort action, and to my mind, not likely. The key part is the court is not likely. The report says he is against it, he doesn't think it's going to happen, but the court is not likely. And this is one of the things I'm going to go back to. Professor Bryan is not saying this is definitely what Trump is going to do. Guaranteed, you could bet the house. He's saying, to me, it's not likely. And I think it's in part going back to what Dr. Ellis said. Well, so far the force committed to this whole thing, it's not cheap to send these ships to Venezuela, but this is nowhere near enough to invade. One of the reasons why I think regime change is not potentially on the table is just the expense. It's not cheap to do regime change. Now, it's cheap if you want to go after specific individuals, and I'll leave you to work it out. You could go after specific individuals, but a regime, the head of the regime does not always constitute the entire regime. It's the lieutenants underneath. In fact, some could argue Maduro being there, how did he even get there, right? He doesn't have the brilliance and the charisma and that ability to lead a situation and control a situation with the force of personality as Chavez did. And I do wonder if some people are kind of taking his faults for granted and thinking, oh, well, he has to be a good guy. Juxtapose how those opinions were, particularly with Professor Bryan saying, I don't think this is likely to happen. The door is still open for it to potentially happen, right? And he did say an intervention will carry at sea, but they chose to destroy the vessel. This is very dangerous. The boat was headed to a port about 45 miles away from Trinidad on the coast of Venezuela. And who knows what might be in the boat, maybe children. It's highly unusual for that, meaning destruction, to be done. I can't tell what they will do, but to continue along the path of what they did would create public outrage, not only in the Caribbean, but throughout Latin America, which, to be fair, is happening. Whether or not the action was correct, it is perceived negatively, and it is understandable that it's perceived negatively. The US and the councils of the OAS and the UN and other things, it's a risky tactic. I don't think they would like to do it again, but I might be wrong because the Trump administration, in my opinion, is headed by a lot of hardliners who think nothing of invading other people's territory. I'll disagree a little bit with that last part because they haven't actually invaded. Now, he might be speaking to the perspectives of the people in the administration, but they actually haven't invaded yet, so I don't know to what extent that's fair. Were they part of the Bush administration? I don't think so. I don't think there are a lot of Bush people left. How many hardliners who support invasion exist in the current government regime? Because they are inheriting a situation where you're occupying Iraq and Afghanistan is not the same thing as saying, I'm going into Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, so he's pointing out the obvious. We really don't know. I will add a third thing. To try to judge Trump as a normal politician, I think, potentially can be a big mistake. Now, he's being advised by politicians, but every now and then some of them decisions ain't going to be in line with politics. How we did the tariffs, arguably, how we did the tariffs is not how most politicians probably would have done it. And the process by which he did it changed the result, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. I don't know. It'll take some time to really get the result of this whole tariff situation to know. So to say he's going to act like the usual politician, I don't know why people want to take that position, but at the end of the day, it is understandable that they do. Let me put it that way. I understand to some extent the possibility of them doing it, because this is generally how you do it. Right? I don't agree with it. I don't know why they think it's pertinent in this case, but I understand that this is something that is usually done because history has kind of shown more often than not you can indicate future behavior by past behavior. It's just that first world democracies change leadership generally, and over time policy positions could change a lot more radically than, say, countries like China or Russia, where the agenda of the leader sets the tone, and as long as he's there, unless he changes his mind, it's not going to change. With countries like the UK or America, policy positions on various issues changes overnight, every 4 to 8 or 5 to 10 years because of changes in government. Now, a local professor, Patrick Watson, he made a definitive statement, right? The US government has never made a secret of its dislike for the Chavez-Maduro administration. And there's evidence up to this day that it has taken action, and I mean negative action, against the regime to achieve regime change. I think this is part of an activity on regime change. Right? He's pointed to the sanctions. He's pointed to the crippling effect that they had on the economy. And then he made a point that I vehemently find is kind of naive and I disagree with. If he stressed he is in no way a Maduro supporter, but the principle of sovereignty must be respected. If he has to be dealt with, he must be dealt with by the people of Venezuela and by nobody else. That is a point I want to make clear up front. And to that point, I will just ask, and maybe I'm wrong, but how many dictators are dealt with by their own people? Because that's what he's saying. If he has to be dealt with, he must be dealt with by the people of Venezuela. Well, you know what? The people of Venezuela had an election. And by all accounts, the opposition was winning. And then their version of the EBC, I can't remember what the official name is, basically stopped communicating for a couple hours, came back online to all the TV stations and live streams or whatever, and radio broadcasts, and then declared Maduro the winner, and had no vote tallies, no records to say that he was the winner, to show where all the votes came from that he was the winner. So the people democratically have been sidelined based on corruption. The courts side with Maduro, the elections side with Maduro, the police side with Maduro, the military side with Maduro. Tell me, unless this is America where everybody has the right to bear arms and thus there will be a sufficiently armed civilian population to resist, how are these people going to resist? Militaries don't exist to defend the countries of dictators. Militaries and dictatorships exist primarily to defend the dictator from the people first and to defend the country second. The Republican Guard of the Iraqi army was there in part, first and foremost, to defend Saddam Hussein's position as leader of Iraq. His people were the baddest equipped people. They were his personal people. They were loyal to him. They were dependent on him, and they would do whatever it took to ensure that he remained in power. So I don't know how you expect the Venezuelan people to rise up now, because it seems as though all attempts have been suppressed, and where, to some extent, we should be grateful that opposition leaders of Venezuela haven't been assassinated, because there are other countries where allegedly that has happened in recent history. So to say that the people have to rise up, that, I'm sorry, to me, the principle of sovereignty, what about the principle of sovereignty for Nazi Germany? We ought to uphold the principle there. Let the people sort it out. No, if someone is an aggressor state, at some point the rest of the world says, we ought to do something against that. What about Grenada? Notice how whenever American intervention in the region is spoken about, very rarely do they go deep into what happened in Grenada. I have yet to hear a Grenadian say our sovereignty was violated. It is nice to have principles, but Professor Watson, dare I ask, what are you sacrificing for that principle? And I really don't, I have interviewed Professor Watson. I think he is a great human being, and I understand where he's coming from. I really do. Because he is taking a principle stand, yes, but I want to point out something. Principles, if you are not sacrificing anything for it, to what extent is it worth anything? It's easy to say this is how it should be from the safety of our own homes right now. And we fear that this situation might spill over to us, and I kind of understand that. But the people who are sacrificing themselves for your ability to make that statement, if we are going to uphold that principle, that sovereignty comes before else, the people who will make that sacrifice for that ideal of sovereignty might be a significant majority of the population of Venezuela. And that's not my opinion based on what just I think from the news. That is the opinion that I get from Venezuelans. And I'm not saying that means we just go in regime change. I'm saying it's not black and white. I'm saying that the complexity of the human heart means that these situations are not so clear-cut. And I will not necessarily agree with the Prime Minister's gung-ho stance because it potentially is going in the other direction. The absolutists of we must and we will get them all. And I get it. There's the temptation to do that with these criminals, with these cartels, with these drug smugglers because it is that bad. I get it, but we have to be careful. If we're too gung-ho in these sort of things, we might give up too much of ourselves, too much of our freedoms, too much of what makes us a democracy, too much of what makes us Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, we should be more productive. Yes, we should be more responsible. Yes, we should be more accountable. Yes, we should be a little bit less laissez-faire. The question is how much? Because if we give up too much of it, if we go too far, then we're not Trinis anymore. We're not Tobagonians anymore. We're some facsimile of Germany or Singapore or Korea, and then we're not us. So it works on both sides. I don't want Professor Watson to think I'm only calling him out. He is just the latest example of ideals that I disagree with in certain ways. But the long and short is, and I know we have a caller waiting, so I'll wrap this up. We are a zone of peace. But with all of the killings, the increase in the murder rate, our murder rate dropped, yes. Why? We still have violent crime against innocent civilians. Notice we're not hearing about gang hits anymore. We're a zone of peace or a partner in war. Dare I say that we've had killings on the level of war in TNT because 600 murders with a population of 1.4 million is way out of excess of any sort of peacetime civilian crime problem. It's way, way beyond a lot of other nations' crime problem. So how much are we at peace? And the last thing I'll say is this: we take peace for granted. Peace is not the natural state of human society. History suggests that the natural state of human society is war, because there will always be people that covet what other people have. There will always be people, that's what criminals are. Why do we think that there won't be world leaders that are immune to that sort of mindset? There are examples of it right now in other parts of the world, right now. Peace is an illusion if you lack the strength, the will, the resolve to fight and defend it. And ironically, the person who we are accusing of breaking the peace in the region, they're one of the few, if potentially the only, and maybe the United Kingdom, who would be ready and willing, if necessary, to defend our sovereignty and our peace. Ain't that something? Or at the very least, we hope that they would, because we have no one else to rely on. We have the caller on the line, Digger Martin. Good morning, caller, on here.
Good morning, Sean. I have to disagree with you with some of your utterances this morning.
That's fine.
All right. Listen to me. I am juxtaposing the current state of criminality and drug trafficking to a patient who has gangrene. And there's only one way a good doctor will tell you. And it's not an easy, it's not a hard way. He would say, we have to cut off your leg for you to survive. Simple. Yes, they might get this psychologist to be part of the discussion, but at the end of the day, is how much leg you have to take off the whole to continue existence. That is one aspect. The other aspect of going after the fourth estate, who I am saying are what they call it, sheep in wolf clothing, or wolf in sheep clothing. I have seen on one of the national newspaper, television, etc. Remember that lady who said, jump the wall and deal with them, JD? That PNM activist. She has been closely associated and has identified recently with the current opposition leader. More importantly, there is a segment called People Say. They put a microphone into her mouth to get her views on certain things. I am saying that is managed in terms of People Say. They continue to edit and not really have a wide cross-section views. And that particular media house, television station, print media, continue to do that, and people have to see it. It's about 4 days ago. Now, I am coming back to the TTPS. My peeve and my pet. The Prime Minister says 6 months. I am seeing in a daily newspaper today a rift in the leadership of the police service. And that is the same media house that I was alluding to. And I could understand. I am seeing that happen for a long while based on the internal ramblings of the TTPS with respect to promotion both at a high level and low level. And the non-existence of the police service commission to intervene in disciplining high-level officers. And I will tell you, for example, DCP INI, there's 2 investigations that supposed to have taken place. One with Erla, now one with the current COP. That investigation, the COP governor should have been given room. The police service commission, because they're all over the place and they're inconsistent, supposed to have sent that person on administration leave just as earlier. So the investigation could have continued. And that is why I'm saying the current police commissioner apparently, and from his evidence and from his action, trying to meet the objective of the current Prime Minister in 6 months. And you're seeing certain things happening that I am quite happy. For example, you say not going to bury his head in the sand. There are corrupt officers and 4 or 5 of them. You see a lot of kidnapped victims, rapid response being freed, and some of them are being given corn to plant and diversify the economy. That's been facetious. So the police service has a good chance now with new elections coming, because they are policing people still in the hierarchy, you know, and no disciplinary action. Nothing has happened since that report was put into the public in 2015. The subsequent police service commissioners and the police, the COPs have not basically disciplined none of those people. They couldn't say anything in the JSC, and they protected people who was very at variance with good policing practice. And my last point, if the foreign minister of Venezuela say it is an AI manifestation, why we have an argument of who blew up who and where the boat was going to the border and how close it was? I mean, they say another local station said that boat with 4 engines. We have no boats in the current arsenal of boats and things to meet up to that. You understand? It is a go-fast boat, and it's frequent Trinidad, and it goes to Carnage. There is information about that, and somebody said there wasn't. It was not a fishing boat. I say it was a fishing boat. You know why? To catch flying fish. I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Here's the thing. Potentially, it's hard to catch up to a go-fast boat with naval assets, right? That's why one of the naval ships there, although I believe the destroyers and the cruiser, the Ticonderoga cruiser, could have a helicopter or two of their own. But more importantly, the Iwo Jima, being an American-class LHD, it should have a complement of both helicopter transports as well as the current version is King Cobras, I believe they are, helicopter gunships. And then, of course, there are also drones. Missiles can catch a go-fast boat, and an aerial platform potentially could catch up to most boats. I don't know if the engine size on that boat was sufficient enough for it to outrun a helicopter, right? It's not impossible. Sorry, let me rephrase. I don't think it's impossible for a go-fast boat to outrun a helicopter, and it also depends how much lead time they have. But the kind of missiles that a Ticonderoga and a Arleigh Burke has, it could catch up to that boat if they could get a lock. Can they get a radar lock on a target that small? I don't know. Hellfires use different seeker heads. It could be optically guided, laser guided. It depends. I haven't been up to date on what the King Cobra's outfitted with and what versions of the Hellfire they use. So there are ways for them to hit it. Venezuela says it's AI. I find that's a very interesting position to take, that they said it's fake. That's a very interesting position to take. It's almost like if they don't want to acknowledge the boats at all. So while we have other people saying it could have been civilians, you know, how could you do this? You have, and again, it's right for this to be questioned because this sets a precedent that could have very negative consequences down the road, right? It's right for it to be questioned. But what is Venezuela's response? Isn't it something? They're not protesting, how could you kill our people? How could you use military force against civilians? They're saying, oh no, it's fake. Let's not believe it did not exist. It's a hell of a stance to take. I don't know if they changed their stance from it, but it's a hell of a stance to take. The go fast boat thing, it could be why they weren't arrested, but again, potentially, if we believe one report, helicopters caught up to the boat, they would have been in proximity to potentially disable the boat and arrest the people, and that would have been better because you would have been able to get information and prove what was on the boat. But they destroyed the boat. We have to ask that question as well. Why didn't they try to capture the boat? There might be reasons, but they need to tell it to us. I can't do everybody's work for them. I have a comment to get to, but we have Couva on the line. I want to get to the comment right after this call, even if we have another caller. But we'll take the caller from Couva first. Good morning, caller, on the air. I also want to speak about the policing thing that you brought up, Mr. Digmartin. Couva on the air. Good morning, caller.
Morning, sir. Morning to everyone.
Morning.
I have a problem. Venezuela and them is not that problem to the extent right now, you know. The problem is the education of our children, police in school, but it has parents who are unemployed due to who work URP and so, and have not received this book grant. Imagine school opened yesterday. A child had to ask the teacher if she could come with the old white shirt she had from the other school, and only 3 books she was able to purchase. And have people who have money getting the grant. And that is my great problem. And I can understand. In the P&M time, they were getting book grants since 2 weeks before school opened. The P&M people tell you it was ready because they had sent out things. Why were the money? What is really going on? That is dotationist manner. Okay?
Thank you, caller. But part of it is you're going to have bureaucratic failures when you have a change in government if you change things out. This is one of the catch-22s of, well, we're going to put our people in and remove your people. I don't know if that's the case, but to some extent, even if the ministry people and whoever controls the grants weren't changed out, the people at the top were changed, right? The ministers, the line ministers were changed. They will start to have trickle-along effects on policy decisions, and they'll have new points of emphasis, and they'll say, no, we want to do this, don't worry about that. And a lot of things informally will fall by the wayside because the new people in charge aren't actively thinking about what the old programs were depending, right? And how they were run and all the different things, the tempo, the pace, like it. This is what I find interesting. If anyone has been a supervisor, a manager, has their own small business with a reasonable amount of employees, more than just like 1 or 2, right? Or even if they're just an employee in a large business that has the ability to observe what's going on. The complexity of when you have a new manager. How many things could go wrong when you have a new manager? How many things could go wrong when the new manager has a different agenda, a different perspective, a different personality, a different leadership style, a different communication style? Now, why would a minister be any different, especially when you know that they're going to have a different agenda? That's the whole point. They were voted in to say that they have a different agenda. And the problem is, change for the sake of change is not always positive. Because when you make changes, there will be unintended consequences of what is left by the wayside. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I'll say this, it's a catch-22. UPEP and CRP was not supposed to be long-term jobs. It's not supposed to be jobs that you could raise a family with, right? That is a failure of government for setting up programs that essentially are being used the wrong way, right? That's point number 2. Point number 3. Yes, the education thing is a big, big, big problem. And I do wonder if, in part, not only is it just political hate, but we're underestimating all of it. And also, there is something to be said about people of means being able to access government grants, and people that don't have the same means, that have less means, are having issues not accessing it. And that is, to some extent, just forget about the change in the agendas now and whatever. To some extent, that is a failure of the public system. Because there should be good leadership in the public service to ensure that, yes, we will be objective and try to institute the changes that the new administration wants to institute, but not let things that they have not directly made decisions on fall by the wayside because we run around like we don't know what we're doing. But also, you have to question the leadership of managing these situations. And it might not be the ministers who manage them directly. It could be the permanent secretaries or people even underneath them. You know, to some extent, I would argue that even if you knew how it went when you were in whatever ministry, that's not guaranteed to be the case right now. Because ministries and change all the time, and there was a point in time when the permanent secretaries seemed to have all the power, and then they figured out, well, we could just transfer them out. And then all of a sudden, permanent secretaries had no power. So, how the public service is being managed, held accountable, and then it goes into then, do we have the good enough people in the public service? And we get what we get. We get what we get. And can we afford too many generations to have a bad education experience when it is not necessarily guaranteed that it had to be that way. And we're not saying, well, if we spend more money, it could have been better. No, we're saying if better decisions were made, the same expenditure, the same time commitment, it would have been better. That's when we have to look at a situation and say, hey, something is not right here. That is what we expect to fix when we change regimes. We have to wait and see this next budget, and also for some things like what are the results. The school term now starts, but it already not starting easy. At least, interestingly enough, I haven't come across this school is not ready to reopen stories yet. I don't know if they were just buried in a news cycle. To the day of policing, there's one thing about it, caller, I don't know if you've necessarily considered. I don't know if the day of policing is a priority for politicians or anybody else that isn't you. I'll be honest, I myself don't really, it didn't bother me enough. I don't have a memory of it, right? I might have been in Tobago when it happened, and depending on the day, I might not have even driven that day. It's not something I believe that the general public had a massive outcry on. So I don't know if there's an incentive to deal with it, because now you have to dig into a can of worms. And who wants to dig into a can of worms? Right? And to some extent, I don't even know if the politicians are kind of aware, because it's more subtle. As much as you might think that it's an obvious thing and it's very overt and look at what they did, really and truly, it's more subtle. The consequences, the issues that you think derive from it are more subtle than the obvious, the murder rate, or what have you. I mean, look how much they defended the previous commissioner's track record. Look how they tried to defend and essentially borderline gaslight us on the track record of the previous commissioner of police. There are a lot of questions with regards to why politicians do what they do when they interfere with the police service. And you hit the nail on the head with the investigations into one DCP. Not that she is the be-all and end-all of the problems, but she is the exposed symptom that we can see, or at least that we can ask questions about that we haven't got a reasonable explanation for. All right, like I said, they have comments to get to. Let's go with the second comment first, if we can. Good day, I welcome your in-depth analysis on policing in schools. Both this policy and stand your ground legislation, to me, wasn't properly thought out to treat with children as if they are adults, shows that the authorities don't seem to understand the basic differentiation, children and adults. Generally speaking, I will agree with this, except my analysis did include the fact that there are going to be multiple facets of this, right? Let's be real now. It might be the exception. There will be certain situations where these kids, when I say these kids, I literally mean in very rare cases, it's beyond the scope of the school to deal with. It's beyond the scope of the school, right? And you can't just say, well, send them home and let the parents deal with them. Depending on what happened, the police do need to get involved. Because this is ironically the catch-22. Children can go too far, where you now have to treat the situation more seriously and involve law enforcement. Because if they don't see an appropriate consequence to how far they've gone, it will encourage them that this is normal, that they could get away with this. If they go too far with violence, if they go too far with threats, if they go too far with not just normal bullying, but bullying to the point where it could lead to another student to have negative thoughts and a negative consequence, and you just kind of treat with it as though, oh, well, little Jimmy hit little Sally. Oh, well, we should send him home early for the day, or he should get detention. That ain't gonna fly. To some extent, it was so bad. This is the thing, the students, criminals figure out how to game the system. So will students. Some of these students realize, what they're gonna do? Send me home? I don't mind going home. Suspend me. If you expel me, all the better. Meanwhile, the school is thinking, well, if we expel all the troublemakers who had 6 or more suspensions, we'll be expelling far too many students. And this will be, yes, it will play bad in the press, But also think about what is the objective to prepare these young men and women for adulthood. And if we just kick them out of the system, how will they be prepared? So the idea would be, in theory, you put the police there to deal with the worst of the worst offenses, to kind of put a break in the pattern of behavior, to arrest that mindset, to say, pause, reconsider. Not just because we ask you to, but because you're going to feel a little bit of consequence now. Because if we don't do it now, then potentially some of you will become hardened criminals, and then it would be the shootout with the police, or it will be the family of the victim of whoever you murdered, right? And society will have to deal with those levels of consequences which are far and away. So, but, the flip side to that, what you said there, in most cases, is true. Is true. The schools are better equipped to deal with 99% of the cases. They're children, and you have to treat them like children. If you go too far, you can have that negative consequence as well. You could erode how they view authority. You could erode how they view the state. You could erode how they view the TTPS. You could potentially negatively impact their perception of their teachers and their mentors and their parents. Because if the police goes too far and the parents said, well, you look for what you get, all of a sudden the child might think, all is against me. The world is against me. And when the world is against me, you know what? Why am I obeying the rules of the world? So you're right. I just want to say, but you have to understand there are probably some exceptions to the rule, because that's just human nature. Human nature is complex enough that we can't just say all children must be treated exactly this way. And that's why I said it's important that the police have flexibility, but they also need to understand the responsibility of going into those schools. It is not just, oh, well, I've interacted with kids on their way home every now and then in the afternoon. No, you are there. You are part of their world. That's not something to be taken lightly. Let's go to the first comment. Mr. Small, you continue to pontificate your flawed position. Please debate this issue as many disagree with your position. What is my position? My position is I haven't seen enough to say that there is definitely going to be regime change. That's more or less the only position, really. I haven't necessarily said that I agree with it or not. I've said that the circumstances might be conducive to a regime change where we don't have all the negative consequences of similar situations. I have said this situation is unprecedented. How is that a controversial position? I have said that the shooting of the boat needs to be questioned and tested in an appropriate forum, which could be a court of law. I just wouldn't know which one. I haven't said America is right. I haven't said the Prime Minister is definitely right. I have said, if you're concerned about CARICOM being splintered, what about the countries that are preemptively, overtly, and upfront speaking for Venezuela? And what about the lack of consideration for Guyana? I have said you could go with all the negative commentary about America's history in the region, but what about Venezuela's history? Notice how the media doesn't bring up that. The few that I have seen bring it up want to make it seem as though Venezuela is such a nice place, and Maduro is such a good guy. He's a nice guy. Maduro is a good boy. Just like how they are all good boys. I have said that the agendas, every nation has an agenda. What's controversial about that? But to say that, I mean, and this is the thing I think why Mr. Sanford and I had a little bit of a disagreement last week. I haven't actually taken the position that you think I have. Just because I've said the things that I've said doesn't mean that I've committed to them. What I'm doing is I am pointing out various angles. I have not said that regime change is impossible. I have said even if the intention was not regime change, they could change their mind and flip that switch and do that regime change. But currently, right now, based on what we've seen them commit to the situation, regime change is not likely because they just haven't put in enough resources into it. And that's, yes, technically that's an opinion, but no one is debating it on that angle. Because dare I say, mostly people who you say would disagree with me, I've yet to hear much of an understanding of how logistics work in military operations. One of the reasons why I agreed with the Dr. Ellis earlier was he said more or less the same thing I'm saying. This is the units that the Americans deployed, this is their capabilities, this is what they can do, this is what they can't do. This is the limitations of a task force that size. You know, ironically, if it was Trinidad and Tobago that you send those ships against, potentially that might be enough to conquer us. Because we only have a single battalion. Well, no, we have a police force of a few thousand men. So if they technically fought, in terms of manpower, the US would still be outnumbered. In terms of actual firepower, we'll be outgunned, but they'll be outnumbered. If they only go with an MEU to try to invade us theoretically. But Venezuela, and now, okay, maybe it's semantics. How do you define regime change? Has anyone defined regime change? I will define regime change. To me, regime change is we're going to remove the entire regime. And that most likely, in most cases, means you have to purge at least the highest levels of military leadership, potentially the highest levels of civilian leadership, potentially the judiciary. In this case, you could probably say the High Court might need to be swapped out if you want to change the regime. And obviously Maduro and all of his lieutenants. That's a lot. That might be just outside the scope of what the Americans are capable of. Let's get a comment. Because I'm not actually debating what most of these people are saying. I'm just saying what they're saying is premature. They are saying there's going to be regime change. I'm saying I'm not willing to say that there's going to be regime change. Where else are we going to go? Now, I did think, I'm not sure if it's you that gave the suggestion of inviting David Abdullah. But to some extent, I've been told, yes, that's him. But to some extent, I'm like, I understand that you think there's a debate there. But right now, given that not that much has happened in terms of showing how far everybody's going to go, we'll just be speaking in theoreticals and hypotheticals if we want to debate anything. That's the point I'm trying to make. Can you articulate what you think my position is? Because listen, part of it is, why can't you call any show and talk to me right now? Mr. San Fernando did it, Mr. Diego Martin does it. Why do you need someone else to do it? Because you think that I would outright disagree with them in a debate. I'm not disagreeing in a debate to say they're wrong, the opposite of what they say is happening. I'm disagreeing in the fact that they're making definitive, absolute statements. And in my opinion, they don't have direct information to make those statements. They are making assumptions. That's why I prefer Dr. Ellis and Professor Boyd. Because the key point is he's not saying this will happen. He's saying, I think this is what's going to happen. I don't think this is what's going to happen because I don't think this is likely. But even Professor Boyd was like, hey, you can't really tell, you know. You can't really tell. There are agendas there. But it doesn't matter if I outright hate you and want to rhetorically speak. I'm not speaking about you. Say there's someone that I dislike to the point where I have threatened to kill him. If I'm never in the vicinity of him with a weapon, and it's just me. He's there with 3 of his boys, and it's just me and one of my guys. I don't have enough men. So I'm saying, wait until I call more men, then I'm a threat. Like, I'm just trying to get people to not go too far with this, because like I said, this is Donald Trump. This is not business as usual in Washington. If public opinion in America is against this, he might actually say, whoa, maybe we can't do it. Or maybe the military might say, hey, we have this problem with that problem. He will flip his decisions at the drop of a hat. He is not a normal politician where he's like, oh, well, I can't be seen as a flip-flopper. So on principle, I have to keep doing what I'm doing. He don't make decisions like all of these past guys. I'm not ready to say that I'm going to predict what he's going to do or not do beyond the fact that in many respects he's unpredictable, so I want to wait and see. I don't see how that's a point to debate. Okay, you want to say the regime change, I want to say I want to wait and see before the regime change. Where else will the debate go? That's the problem. I don't want to invite somebody. And then either we don't really speak about anything useful or we have nowhere to go with it. Because I'm not actually debating the point that they're making. I am more debating on the manner of which the communications is happening and the conclusions are being come to. But I'm not saying outright that it's wrong and that it will never happen. Because like I said, I'm not saying regime change is off the table. It is very much a possibility. And it doesn't have to be Trump. That could have been with almost any politician. The situation is unprecedented. So to say that it's a sign of X or Y would not be a good idea. Now that I have more information that I cannot verify to be true about the shooting of the boat, but if we just assume it to be true, you have to ask the question, why didn't they try to capture the occupants of the boat if they were able to catch up to them to speak to them? I don't know if the warning was via radio, but according to the report, it was, I assume, like a loudspeaker PA system from a helicopter. That's my assumption. But the point is, it says the helicopter was there, the helicopter shone the light and what have, and blah, blah, blah. Why could you try to capture them as opposed to blow up the boat? And that question then puts it in a realm of, this is a very unprecedented situation. To say that we know exactly what their motivations are. He's saying they're going after terrorists, and maybe that's what it is. They're treating them like terrorists. Maybe that's what the Navy did. I don't know what the rules of engagement for terrorists are, but we know that from Obama's time, I don't know if Bush did it, drone strikes was just a thing. Why put our people in risk trying to capture? Just drone strike them. Get the lawyer to approve it, drone strike them, and be done with it. Will that hold up in a court of law? I have no idea. And that's why I say it needs to be questioned. Let's see what the next comment is. Let's take the one on the day of policing first. Day of policing will go down as a day in infamy. Rather than protect and save, the police office led by Alexander took action on the public and made them suffer because of pay issues. Alexander was on radio taunting us to walk with your breakfast because police will cause massive traffic jams. All right, fair enough. I hate to say this, but depending on, I didn't witness it, right? So I don't know for sure. Depending on how true this is, I don't know what tone that he may or may not have spoken in, but let's just go with what the comment is on face value. The current government has no incentive to look into the day of policing. Period. End of story, if this is all true. If Alexander was publicly part of it. Not just he was part of it, but on the sidelines. But if he was publicly speaking on behalf of it, current administration have no incentive to go after this thing. And again, there's also the lack, I understand that now we have someone else talking about it and calling it out and describing it as very negative, but we don't have enough public outcry. 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, 100 people, that's not enough. That's not enough. And to some extent, people will juxtapose that, but we need Alexander to deal with the criminals, so shh, super wrong. And again, I don't know what he did or didn't do, what he might have done wrong over the day of policing. I have not witnessed this firsthand. I can't speak to it, right? I don't have any issue with the Minister of Homeland Security for the most part. He's done some things that I agree with. He's done some things that I question. He's new to the post. He hasn't done anything to to make me think outright, oh no, he's bad and we have to get rid of him. He's not that bad, right? At the very least. It's not like the example I gave earlier where I knew earlier clock that it was bad. No, I'm not going to say that with the Minister of Homeland Security. I think like any human being, he has limitations like any human being, like you and me. And all I could hope for is a genuine human being to work within himself reasonably. And as long as he's doing that, and we're getting results, because it doesn't matter how much effort you put in. Government is unfortunately a results-based business, but we have yet to really see what the results are. Nobody could circumvent needing to wait and see what crime-fighting results would be. Literally, you have to wait for the results. Otherwise, you have no idea if things are working or not. But yeah, that air policing thing, it's not that simple. The thing is, it could have been a controversial issue if the public had enough of a sustained outcry. And even then, there are times when the politicians seemingly could just kind of gaslight and bully their way out of these situations. Because again, I still cannot get over the fact that maybe this is why they lost the election, but at least on the surface, it looked as though they were getting away with reappointing Ella Christopher for the technically second year. But I believe it was the second reappointment, not necessarily the first, because they decided, oh, let's take someone a couple months into retirement age and make that person the commissioner. Let's take up the last comments. Maybe. Like I said, I was considering it, but I don't necessarily want to put Mr. Abdullah in a weird spot. And by the way, it's not about shielding him, right? It's not about, oh, I don't want to make him look bad. I don't want him to look bad because procedurally, the episode is going to be clumsy, because it's not a thing where I have a side that disagrees with his side, right? So, if it's harder, to some extent it's harder to understand when you haven't had to try to do the job of having an interview and trying to, because it's not just, oh, well, we're going to debate and I want to make myself look good and win the debate. That's not what it's about. It's about having the conversation and what you just said there, to educate the public on whatever the matter is. Having disagreements actually helps, because then you could kind of have counterpoint, and massage the issue, explore the different facets of the issue, perspectives of the issue, the angles that you could take the issue, and hopefully come to a good conclusion in the end. I don't necessarily know if we'll get there, because then it will be what part of history does he want to prioritize, and to some extent, what parts of history that I will deprioritize versus what I will prioritize. And then even then, yes, we might debate certain things about the lead up to what caused this, but the actual situation, it won't really be a debate. Now, if he wants to debate, maybe if he wants to discuss, the thing is, he had a special with Andy Johnson after the Venezuelan elections. All of that, it might make the interview relevant. I don't think it will debate, but there might be room to have an interview and a discussion. So, like I said, I was thinking about it, but my schedule for this week kind of got very weird when things happened, right? But this will probably be an issue into next week, and we could probably do the interview next week. All right, so this is a good time to end the show there. There are some things that I didn't get to yet. Hopefully I'll get to tomorrow. Mr. Diego Martin, the issue about the police executive, that I think speaks to some of the things that you spoke about in your contribution. But I'll say this last thing, because you pointed out a political activist, and I can't remember everything you said. I'll just warn people about political activism. This is not all activists. There are those well-meaning people who want to make a difference in the world. But dare I say, those people might be in the minority. Because the bacchanal and the bubble and the nonsense in politics usually turns well-meaning, hardworking people off from the situation, right? Sooner or later, in the case of the American election, there was a Democratic Party agent. I think she was a fundraiser or something along those lines. After the election, she hit basically the media circuit, conservative outlets and some moderate, basically pointing out questions and holes with how the Kamala Harris campaign was operated, the lack of accountability, etc., and the issues that she had. And it's like, if this is how we're going to run politics, I can't agree with this, and she walked away. You might say she's an opportunist or whatever. I'm not going to debate that point. She pointed to very real issues that has not necessarily been properly disproven. The good people will walk away. Good people tend to avoid, too many of our best and brightest and our morally upright citizens avoid politics in this country. And in many others. So because of that, I'll leave with two warnings on political activists. Beware not the genuine activists, but the activists who are fakes, who are frauds, who don't actually believe what they say. And eventually, over time, you might see clues that they don't actually believe in what they say. Some of it is if they flip-flop a position. Some of it is if they say one thing but do something else. Their activism is only meant to enrich themselves, to increase their standing in society, to increase their returns, their income, their revenue streams. The other one, and to some extent, these ones may have started off as well-meaning. So that's the other thing. If you keep your integrity intact, you might decide the only way to do that is walk away. But those that stay, that are well-meaning and good intention, at some point they get caught up in the fight. It's not about debating an issue to get the best solution to the issue. It's about winning the debate on the issue. Even if our solution is worse, because we need to win, because they, whoever they are evil. And whatever they say must be evil and wrong. And we cannot allow whatever they say to come to pass because they are evil and everything they do is evil. And we are the truth and the light and the way and we must win. And if it sounded like I was getting a little bit religious there, that's because at that point politics turns into religion. The negative aspects of religion, you see it in politics. The fervor to the point of irrationality. The zealotry. It's no longer about what's the right thing for the country. It's about winning. It's a descending spiral of a dance between themselves and their immediate opponents. It's about winning the argument. It's about making them look bad. It's about discrediting them. It's about disgracing them. It's about putting our foot on their necks and making sure they could never come back. It's a competition, a cutthroat competition. It's a game, and we're playing for a prize, and the prize is power, because we need the power to make change, right? But at some point, you forget about that. And you use the power and abuse the power to win the game. Because the game, the argument, the winning the debate, not for the sake of finding the right solution, but for the sake of being the winner, that becomes the goal in that descent into madness. And that's what we might be left with for the most part right now. I don't know if I find it laughable, funny, sickening, or aggravating. Thanks to the commenters, thanks to the callers. This is talking about a WESN show, Michael Small, saying, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Have a good day. Even if you get caught in some kind of traffic shenanigans, try your best to be nice, to be cooperative. Even if you think the traffic warden is making the situation worse, don't quarrel with them. They're just trying to do their job the best they know how. It's nice to be nice, even if you're upset, because we have to try to do better for each other if we want to find a way out of the hole we've dug for ourselves. We have dug our own trap. We have laid our own spikes. Now the question is, will we fall into it ourselves? It's not too late. We just need to do our best. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Advanced Solutions Technical Institute isn't just about courses, it's about creating futures. We serve every learner, from the new graduate to the seasoned professional, with engaging, supportive staff and tailored learning plans. Study in the way that works for you and gain skills in business, security, finance, telecoms, fiber optics, and beyond. ASTI, training tomorrow's leaders today.